Here, observations with Otsu. Hope you've had a good weekend. Hope it's a good morning as well. We're always saying good morning, and doesn't matter how bad the markets are. We try to have a good morning. So I'm just gonna get right started. You know the drill. This is the first official week going into a new series of videos. So gonna get started. Cut to the chase. We're gonna look at Bitcoin for now. We're gonna look at a few different news things as well. Binance, if you know, this is a little bit more down than normal. It's because they got sued by the SEC today, so that's why. Because of security issues, probably regarding to their U.S. exchange, which is one that I have used. So that does pertain to me personally, but that's one reason why it's down a little bit lower. Excuse me. Another thing is this was up more. I think Mana is also up. I think I mentioned this earlier today. One of the reasons it was up higher than that, of course, that's why there's a wick. One reason is it's WWDC, and a lot of people are looking at Mana because I don't know why this is here, but a lot of people are looking at Mana because Apple is planning to release some metaverse type stuff, and so the best thing to buy is land, I guess. So that's kind of why that's up. It's something that I kind of picked a couple days ago. Not really a pick per se, pretty easy, obviously, to look at, but that's kind of what's going on with that. Other than that, it's pretty much a typical Bloody Monday. I mentioned in another video that this is pretty typical for old school stuff. So no big deal. It happens. We had a good week over the weekend. We'll look into that and we'll just get started. So let's go ahead and go to the 1 week chart. All right. So we had a basically bearish week, as you can see. Not of too much significance. We kind of have like a wedge going on here, and so I know I'm not trying to make it so dumb simple, but that's what you got. That's what we see. This tends to work really well. So we kind of had that bearish week, but with kind of this inside here, this wick that went up. So we're doing okay. This is something I mentioned in the last video, is that we had a down move. We've had pretty much no uptrend so far, but we had a pretty good down move so far. It's only been 1 day. We still got 6 days. I think I mentioned this quite often, actually. It is very typical to see a sell-off on a Monday, and we used to literally call it Bloody Mondays, and so that's one thing that we see here. I'm not scared by this, and I mentioned this last week. I'm not scared by that either. We had a pretty bearish week, and I made money. I mean, all of my money was made on longs, so it's not like you can't make money on an opposing candle. And I'm not necessarily recommending either, but don't let this fool you. Don't let this fool you. So we have that. Another thing that we have. So these are kind of alerts I have. Let's see if I can go to a different chart, because I want to keep those, but I don't want to. There we go. So going to Binance, still have that wedge in play. Another thing that we see, and I mentioned this last week, is this engulfing pattern. What I tend to do is put a box around the liquidity areas. So this gives me an area where we should potentially bounce. This is a big area that people are looking at, and some people even say, like, well, too many people are looking at it. Well, doesn't mean it's wrong. You know, it's not necessarily that. So this is where I'm looking at an area to bounce. Another area I'm looking at is a bullish move above this trend line. When you see a trend like this and it breaks, that's typically a good sign. Typically means that supply is exhausted for that trend, and generally we can see a double top, or at least a mid at the minimum. So that's kind of what I'm looking at right now. We're still above these lows, we're kind of breaking it. We're kind of in between, kind of indecisive. Like I said, 6 days to go. But overall, this is pretty reasonably okay. We did break through this, so that's a little bit concerning. Another reason why I think that we could hit that 25. But overall, not too bad. Here's that deviation from last week that I mentioned. We went up, went down. That was your time to get out of any longs, unless you have long-term spot like me. From down below, this was your time to get out of your positions. Deviations are deviations that put your position in an opposition. You need to sell those positions typically. So, but and the inverse is true. So like if we went down here and we deviate above, that would be the time to long. Deviations are a great way to long or short, in my opinion. Gives you a fantastic risk to reward, and generally don't invalidate. You can generally add a tighter stop to that, and this is a good example of this. This deviated here. Really, the only problem is you wouldn't really know where to put your stop. I mean, you could put it. If it's big enough like this, I'll put it at the opposing side of the candlestick, and so not a good R&R. I typically, and that's one reason why I usually do more longs than shorts, is because shorts don't get you the R&R that you like to have, and especially on the 1 week. It's not really fair, right? So what I see on the weekly, let's go to the daily. You see a little bit better picture here. One thing that I had mentioned in a previous video is we had a daily divergence. We had the awesome oscillator do the same thing, and we had a wedge on Arun, so that kind of led to this pump right here, and now we're kind of fading that. That's a result. That's reminiscent, or how should I say that? It's mimicked on Arun by the bearish consolidation. I say that because Arun doesn't do that. It just shows you what the charts are doing. So we have a bearish consolidation, which means we're going to get a slow fade. Once this blue marker comes above, the bullish trend will resurface. And so I'm kind of waiting that out. That's one reason why I think that we are going to have more of a bullish month than people think. People just like to be pessimistic, I guess. So we had the wedge here inside the bigger wedge, and so that's something that I see. What I'm looking for is I'm looking for a consolidation break here. If this breaks the trend line, that is my sign to add more on longs. And so it would look something like this. Probably add somewhere around here or wherever that tends to be above this line. So let's say it's right here. I'm okay with it being higher than it currently is. My invalidation would be probably below this bar here, but somewhere in this range. And then my target is pretty high, actually. I would probably target 40,000. And this is a long-term spot portfolio, so the risk would be also the risk would be also be higher, probably 5%. So this 3 would actually be like 15. So that's kind of going into that, right? So that's kind of what I'm looking at. I think that we could get there's a chance that we could get a flash wick to 25. I still think 25 can happen. I don't think that we go lower than 24, 23. I don't think that we visit 15 again. I don't. And we could. I'm not gonna say like, we can't or necessarily like prove me wrong, but it's one of those things like it doesn't seem very logical at this point. So that's kind of what I see. We do not want this to break down below this wedge. That would be a sign that we would definitely go to 24. I would rather have it break above and then go down versus break straight down, because that would be much more bearish. So I am looking for a bullish break of this to signal a reaccumulation pattern. We've seen that already with this. And see, here's the thing. This pattern is very reminiscent here. Like, we could be in this stage and we go down, everybody's shorting the crap out of this, right? This was probably one of the most tricky scenarios, because not only did it break here, but it also broke here, and then it actually broke bullish. So, and there was no really, that's one weird thing about the TA. There was no real reason for that to happen TA wise. And it happens, but we're already going up from I figured that was, we'll get into that. So going into 4 hour, kind of seeing Similar thing play out. We got the breakdown here. RSI is broken down. This could go down to about 26.4, about 26.2, and then it might bounce from there. If we get down to like 25.9, I think that's also sufficient. So we could look at that. So very simplistic. I don't really want to get into the lower time frames here because it's still chop. I think we really need to focus more on higher time frames for now. This is what I see. Just keep it simple. I'm under the perspective of I want to make really good positions for the next year or two. I've already got 16.3. I want to make more long-term positions, and I think higher time frame perspectives will help with that. So, all right, let's go to Ethereum. All right, so let's go to Ethereum. Go on the weekly. Weekly, we had, in the last video, I mentioned that Ethereum looks a little bit better than Bitcoin, and sure enough, the weekly has kind of represented that. We still had the bearish week, but it wasn't really strong. Wasn't as strong as Bitcoin. We had a pretty good reclaim on this. Still bearish. That's okay. Every candle doesn't need to be bullish or bearish. It's just how it is. Again, we have that big sell-off, but this is only 2%. It's not a big deal. I mentioned this last week. It happens. It's going to happen on the first day. And so one thing that I see in particular is we had this trend that kind of retested below. That was your time to short. But now we have a second attempt here. If you kind of want to put that together, it's not my favorite, but that's something to look out for. I don't think I would really short anything necessarily until we break this on the weekly. Or maybe you could focus on the daily with that. Again, same thing is playing out with this deviation with retest. It's another good example. So we are starting to get that little rounded retest that needs to be reclaimed before we really get into any long positions. Excuse me. I'm not very much interested on Ethereum for longs or shorts right now because these deviations tend to be very strong. So this needs to be reclaimed. The fact that it retested and slightly rejected is something that, although it's not as bearish as it could be, because it did decently okay last week, it's not something that I want to invest in, so to speak. I would rather see this come at least close into this area right here, or definitely reclaim this area. And again, I would probably double my risk if that happens. It's much better to double your risk on a position that you know will likely be successful versus like gambling it away. So that's kind of what I see on the weekly. On the daily, we see this rejection playing out, series of higher lows, not a good sign. Again, something that I would wait and see too long. That being said, on the short side, it doesn't make sense because you got this reclaim right here. This reclaimed up. We had the deviation, but that rejected. This should have went down. It did not. It went up instead. Now we're consolidating. This is a consolidation, and so we need to kind of let that play out before we can long or short. So this would be how I would play this out. I would take this whole area, and let's get rid of all these. And so I would play it very simplistic. If it breaks above, you long. You can target the other end of the box, or even slightly inside the box, and you could target like so. Or you could, if it breaks down below here, you could target like so, and target the top of the bars. You focus on the wicks are the entry point, the bars, the opposing bars are the stops. And so you can do something like so. Got a 2R roughly on each side, but you also got a high conviction that that's not going to invalidate. So that's how I see that on the 4 hour. We can I think that was a small position that I had. So I have 2R on there as well. Kind of some personal trades. But you kind of see this. One thing that I personally like here is you kind of have this zone. So we're kind of in a limbo state. I don't think I would short any more than this. And when we get kind of, we got 8 hours to go. So typically when you get into the midday of Monday, which is, it's morning for me right now. It's almost It's almost lunchtime actually. But once you get to this point, typically it's not worth trying to short because the shorting momentum has already taken effect. So that's how I see that. I think I would personally wait for the day and see how this bounces out of that, and then, like I said, on that daily, focus on this short along that. So, all right, let's. I usually only cover Bitcoin, Ethereum. I'm going to cover Binance because of the SEC thing. So this will be a little bit longer than normal. All right, last but certainly not least is Binance. Honestly, I'm not a big fan of Binance. I'm not a big fan of the chain. I'm not a big fan of the whole setup, whatever. But that's my personal thing. I still trade it, but let's go ahead and see what we got. All right, so had the big run up from 2021. It was a long time ago. Had much more fuller week. I see we had that engulfing, so that was probably another sign of potential downward momentum. And this is actually a really good thought experiment because the SEC just sued Binance, and you can kind of tell in the 30 minutes that was the case. And obviously, you can tell that this was a news catalyst event. However, and so this is the thought experiment. How much of that really was a news triggered event? Now, it was a news triggered event, 100%. But at the same time, how would this have been different if this was a bull market? Or if we were consolidating at the highs or a different part of the chart? See what I'm saying? This had this big of an effect partly because the chart was lending itself to do that. And if you've ever wondered, a lot of bad news tends to happen at the lows. Why is that? Because it's correlated with the market psychology. So it's not so much, I don't want to say correlated per se, but there tends to be more bad news during bad markets. And that's a little bit, it's mostly true. It's mostly true. But you would find that it's not really a matter of being true or false, but it's more of a matter of impact. So we can see that this is a big down move for now today, and partly because it was kind of being a weak asset to begin with. So let's go ahead and look here. And I had this on my chart before, but we can kind of match this up a little bit. And if I want to try to match something like this, I try to just look at all the angles, and we see one right here. And so we could stop here for the day. I would look and see if we stop here, and that would match up with this trend line. If it doesn't, I don't really like this necessarily because it's a mix of wicks and bars. I like to do one or the other. So if this doesn't hold, I think this will be okay. And so overall, this isn't necessarily surprising. Yes, it is because of the SEC drop, but there's other assets that are going down too. Are these because of the drop? Maybe, maybe not. But at the same time, the market lends itself to this kind of thing. So anyway, so we have that. I think also here we could have a more of a bearish channel. Not the most perfect, but it still exists. And you can see the market kind of going down. So this is, market as a whole is going down. So you got one or two things you could present. You could say, well, the Binance suing thing was a catalyst, and that's probably true, honestly. But also at the same time, the supply is increasing because people want to get out of the markets. So I think it's really a dumb thing, honestly. Like, the whole SEC thing is generally, I mean, it's a sell. It's usually a sell event for the first day, but it's usually not much eventful after that. So don't want to even get into that too much, but you can see the market reacting very poorly to that. And this is where it kind of ties into a previous video about WWDC today. Some people were looking at WWDC as a bullish event, trying to have it a catalyst for crypto when Apple has nothing to do with crypto traditionally. we're trying to make these events, and now we're saying, oh, this event caused the other event to not go, blah blah blah. So you kind of got a mix of things that don't make too much sense. So anyway, you got all of that going on. So that being said, that is the weekly. Kind of a mess, honestly. It's kind of a mess, and I've mentioned in other videos why I think, unfortunately, I do think Binance could go down to $40, 40, 50 bucks, 46, based off of this pattern right here, honestly. So we'll see if I'm right or wrong. Don't really care either way, but this is a very classic pump fade. Dogecoin did this, and I can see this doing that as well. I can see I can see a bull market without Binance. Let's put it that way. But it is what it is. So let's go to the daily. See the big drop off from today. You kind of had this consolidation at the lows, so it was kind of lending itself to something happening anyway. So another thing that we can look at is this trend line was very rejective, and so that was a key sign to wait for any longs. This wasn't necessarily this was not here, so it was hard to kind of judge that. Another thing that I see here is you have this bullish engulfing. So this could be a good retest point for the day. Could be. We could see that today. I think that can make sense. Another thing is if we go, let me see how it fits here on the 2-day. Those two, yeah, here it is. So those two candles, these two candles, usually when you get a big candle like this and another big candle like this, it tends to be a bullish engulfing on a higher time frame, which it was on the 2-day. When you have something like this, when you have a big candle like this is not technically the retest point. This one is, because you're retesting this range as opposed to this range. This one was already tested, and it still could, but now this is it here, and now you can see we've already broke that. So I see one or two options here. I see either we reclaim this and then we bounce off of here, or we come down here. I think it's probably one or the other. And so here's another engulfing here, so we could probably do the same here, somewhere in this range. So I can see Binance cascading downward continually. So that's the thing. Like, again, market psychology. Yes, the SEC sued Binance today. That is the main reason why it's going down. However, there were other reasons why it went up years ago, because of different bullish narratives, and those narratives didn't get retested, and that's why bad news has much more impact than it typically should. I mean, this is a big deal, though, so don't get me wrong. But the thing is, those things, a bullish catalyst that makes an asset go up 20% does so. I consider that an unnatural event, and it may be natural, may not, but the natural reaction is to just buy. But the thing is, that's an untested event typically, and so you're going to see price return to that point, and that's exactly what we have here. So yes, it is because of this, but at the same time, that's a part of the charts. So anyway, these are the two targets that I have interested in. Yes, that's 2-day. On the 4-hour, as you can see, we're going down pretty fast. I mean, by the time this gets online, this might even be done, but nothing much to say here. It's just in a free fall. I would not try to buy this. Usually when you get these kind of things, it's going to keep going and maybe chop and then continue to go down. So wouldn't really touch that. I'm looking at one of these two ranges. Looks like it's in a pretty good free fall. So anyway, we got all that going on. That's the video. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you are not losing money trying to capitalize on it somehow, and I'll see you in the next video.